Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos, Bechoros, the laws of the firstborn. And of course we say Moadim L'Simcha, Agut Mayid. It's another day of Chol Hamoed Sukkos, Man Simchaseinu, the time of our joy, and there's no better way for a Jew to experience joy than to study the Torah. As we're going to see, there's also somewhat of a connection to the time that we're in, to these laws of the firstborn, and that's another type of Hashgacha Pratis that we always see when we learn how the Rambam is always connected to the current Parsha or the current time that we find ourselves in. The laws of the firstborn are included in this book because this is the book about individual sacrifices. And as we're going to see, in the ideal scenario, if certain kosher animals have a firstborn son, the son is holy and needs to be offered as a sacrifice to Hashem. In the case where the firstborn gets a blemish and it cannot be offered as a sacrifice, it converts into one of the gifts of the Kohen and it goes to the Kohen. But in its optimum state, it's to be brought as a sacrifice. So that's why it's included in this set of laws. As we're going to see, besides for discussing directly about firstborns, we're also going to be discussing another type of sacrifice. And the Rambam will explain himself actually in quite an unusual fashion why he's including it in this rubric under the same set of laws. So without further ado, let's get right to it. The Rambam, as he always does, gives us the list of mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in this set of laws. Yesh bichlalan chamesh mitzvahs. In this set of laws, we're going to have 5 mitzvahs discussed. Shtei mitzvahs aseh, v'shalish mitzvahs leis aseh, 2 positive mitzvahs and 3 negative mitzvahs. V'zehu pratan, and these are their details. Aleph, lahafrish b'chayres. We need to put aside a firstborn. If a firstborn is born to us in our flock from our kosher animals, then we need to put it aside because it's holy. If a bechor is tamim, it's unblemished, it's in its ideal state, and it's offered as a sacrifice, it shall not be eaten outside of Jerusalem. We call this kadashim kalim, lighter level sacrifices, which are offered in the temple and can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, but not outside. Gimel shalayi padeh habechor, a special prohibition that a firstborn animal cannot be redeemed. In certain cases, sacrifices that become disqualified can be redeemed. Money transferred, the holiness transferred onto money. Bechor doesn't work that way. Dalid, lahafrish meiser behema. The second half of these laws is going to deal with what's called meiser behema, the animal tithe. The animal tithe we're going to see at length, beginning in chapter 6, is how at the end of every year, a person takes all the animals that were born in his flock that year, puts them into a pen, lets them out one by one, and every 10th one is designated as a sacrifice. So there's a mitzvah to put aside the animal tithes. Hey, shalayi goyel meiser behema, the animal that's been set aside as the tithe, also, like the bechor, shall not be redeemed, shall not be transferred. The one that was designated as the one that should be offered. The Rambam immediately addresses a curiosity here. Why are these 2 things included under the same umbrella? Hilchos Bechoros should be discussing the laws of the firstborn. Why are we including the laws of the animal tithe? Says the Rambam, and again, in highly unusual fashion, v'chalalti hamaiser im habechoyer, I have included the laws of the animal tithe together with the firstborn, lefi shemase shneim echad. First of all, because the procedure for offering both of them is uniform. The same way we offer a bechor, we offer the meiser, the same laws that apply to this one apply to that one. V'hakosov klalei imay. And also the Torah puts them together. Shenemar, when Torah describes the gifts to the Kohen, it talks about the bechor and the meiser, and it says ve'es damam, or es damam tizraik. You shall sprinkle their blood. Mipi Shmuel lamdu, we learn from tradition, shezeh dam meiser v'dam bechor. The word damam, their blood, is a reference to the firstborn and to the animal tithe. So since the Torah puts them together, I too, says the Rambam in codifying these laws, followed that pattern and put them together. As the Rebbe once addressed, this is not really called answering a question. This is called moving the question, right? So you've told us that you put it together because the Torah puts it together, but why does the Torah put it together? In fact, the Rebbe says on a mystical level, Bechor and Meiser are actually opposites. Bechor is the number 1, the firstborn animal, at the top of the hierarchy. Meiser is the end. Once you count out 10, the last one, 10 mystically referring to the completeness of number, the last one is the Meiser. So Bechor is first, Meiser is last. So why would that be a reason to put them together? And the Rebbe explained, again, not legally, albeit more mystically, that we have a principle that's called no tseifan b'tchilasan. The end must always be wedged in the beginning. The complete harmony is achieved when the beginning and the end reach a certain level of wholesomeness and jointness. So by putting Bechor and Meiser together, the Rambam is alluding to the fact that we need to put together the beginning of the hierarchy and the end of all hierarchies need to join in harmony. On a different level also, the Rebbe once addressed that Bechor is a holiness imposed by heaven. You cannot choose which animal is born first. You don't make the Bechor holy. He's holy in essence. Meiser is completely and wholly designated by the person. You count out the 10, and the one that comes out 10th, and you have to declare it 10th, as we're going to see later in these laws, and you have to mark it as the 10th, you create the holiness. So that's also a fusion of what's called Avodas Hamayla and Avodas Hamata, service that comes from above and service that comes from below. So again, while we're not offering here a very legal interpretation, but the idea of unifying, bringing together the forces of above and below, beginning and end, are definitely alluded to here in the Rambam, putting together Bechor and Meiser Behema under one rubric. The explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following 8 chapters, God willing, 5 chapters for Bechor, 3 chapters for Meiser Behema, as we're going to see over the next week with God's help. Perek Rishon, the Rambam begins chapter 1, and this is mainly kind of a general overview. What is a Bechor? What are the basic do's and don'ts with a Bechor? What is the Torah's instructions for us when having a firstborn animal? And then we're going to get into more details in the coming days. Halacha Aleph, mitzvah saseh. It's a positive mitzvah, lehafrish kol peter rechem hascharim, to put aside every male opener of the womb. That means if the first progeny, the first child to be born, is a male, we need to put them aside. And the truth is, this concept of firstborn holiness applies to a larger scope than just animals. Bein ba'adam, bein b'behema tahira, bein nimin hachamar. Whether it's the human being, as we've discussed in the 7th book, in the laws of Bikurim, one of the gifts to the Kohen is the Pidyon Haben, the concept that a firstborn son of a human being belongs to the Kohen. Whether it's kosher animals, and the truth is, whether it's a donkey. Torah speaks specially about a donkey, firstborn donkey, belonging to the Kohen, as we also discussed in the 7th book. Bein shahayu shleimim, bein shahayu treifais, doesn't matter their physical state. They're whole, they're mortally wounded. Shenemar, because the Torah says, and this is the verse that encompasses all of the types of Bechor, Kadosh li kol Bechor, sanctify for me all firstborns, Peter kol rechem bivnei Yisrael, the opener of any womb among the Jewish people, ba'adam uva behema, both in the human kingdom and in the animal kingdom. B'kulam la'koyanim, and the Torah's command is that all of these firstborns belong essentially to the Kohen. But now says the Rambam Halacha Beis, there's a big difference in how you treat the different firstborns. B'chayr adam u'b'chayr chamar niftim. Human firstborns, donkey firstborns shall be redeemed. U'pidyoinam la'koyanim, the redemption money goes to the Kohen, but the human firstborn goes back to the father, and the donkey goes back to the owner. Whereas u'b'chayr behema tahira, the firstborn of a kosher animal becomes holy, and it itself is to be offered as a sacrifice. It's to be slaughtered in the temple courtyard like any other level sacrifice. You sprinkle its blood, you offer certain parts of its insides, as we explained in the laws of sacrificial procedures in the last book. And the rest of the meat is to be eaten by the Kohanim exclusively. How do we know this difference? How do we know to treat human and donkeys firstborn one way and kosher animal firstborns the other way? Shenemar says that Rambam, take a look at the verse which describes the Kohanic gifts. It says that all firstborn womb openers belong to the Kohen, but then it clearly differentiates between the two. However, you shall redeem the firstborn of the humans. And you should also redeem the firstborn of the non-kosher animals, the donkeys. However, continues the verse later, the firstborn of an ox, the kosher animal, or the verse continues, Bechor Kesa, Bechor Eis, sheep and goats. Over there it says, Lo yisifde, kodesh heim. You don't redeem these become holy. You sprinkle their blood, etc. Uvisaram yiyelach, and their meat shall be for you, for the Kohanim. That's the context of the passage here. It gives to the Kohanim. The meat goes to the Kohanim. But it's first and foremost a sacrifice. And from here we know that Bechor Behema Torah has this law. Now that's only if it's eligible to be a sacrifice. Halacha Gimel, Bechor Behema Torah Shehu Balmum. What happens if you have a firstborn kosher animal which is blemished? Bein Shanelad B'mumay, Bein Shanafal B'mum, Achar Shayatamim, whether it was born with the blemish or the blemish came to it after it was born complete, Harehu LaKohen. It skips the sacrificial step, it goes right to the Kohen. And it goes right to the Kohen, not in the holy context. If he wants, he could eat it anywhere, even outside of Jerusalem. You can sell it, you can feed it to whoever he wants, even to a guy, because it's completely unholy. Shenemar, as it says in the verse, a different set of verses, which talks about the Bechor. And here we have the connection to today's time, because this passage right here, that's on the screen, is going to be read in a couple of days on Shmini Atzeret. On the 8th day of Sukkot, the Torah reading is this passage, includes this passage. And what does it say? First it talks about the ideal Bechor. You're supposed to make it holy and eat it in front of God in the temple. But then it says, if there shall be a blemish in it, crippled or blind, and the verse continues, any other bad blemish, then you don't offer it to Hashem. Instead, you eat it in your gates. And the verse concludes, some Rambams have the word yechlenu, but that's brought in from a different verse. This is the verse over here as it's on the screen. The impure person and the pure person can eat it together like you would eat the meat of any other animal, a deer or a gazelle. Point being, anybody can eat it, even a guy, in any situation. It has no holy laws dictating how it should be eaten. It's literally the possession of the Kohen. It's his belongings. He can do whatever he wants with it. That's if it's blemished. Returning for a moment generally to the firstborns. It says that it's a mitzvah to verbally sanctify the firstborn kosher animal. And you should say, this is holy. Shanemar, because the verse says, and this is earlier in the passage, Takdish la Hashem alekecha, you shall sanctify it to Hashem. That means you have to verbally sanctify it. If you didn't sanctify it, and it is a miskadosh me'elav, it still becomes holy on its own, because it's just firstborn. You can't help it, you can't change the status. And its holiness is from the womb. In other words, it's born holy. The mitzvah of this firstborn kosher animal and all that comes with it applies both in Israel and outside of Israel. However, we don't bring the firstborn animals from the diaspora into Israel. Because it says, you shall eat in front of Hashem your God, masar degoncha tireishcha v'yitzarecha, the tithe of your grains, your wine, and your oil, uvecheres bekarcha v'tzeinecha, and the firstborns of your cattle and sheep. Torah clearly puts together firstborns and the tithes. From here we learn, from any place which you would bring the tithes of grain, from there you should bring firstborn cattle and sheep. But from a place where you wouldn't bring tithe of grains, for example, the diaspora, you don't bring the firstborn of the cattle and the sheep. Rather, what do you do with it? You treat it as unholy, and you have to wait till it gets a blemish, and then the Kohanim can eat it. So much so that if you brought it to Israel, we don't take it, we're not going to offer it, we're going to wait till it gets a blemish, and we're going to eat it with a blemished state. Furthermore, this mitzvah of Bechor, using the same juxtaposition of Bechor to Meiser in this verse here, so we also know that Bechor's mitzvah applies whether there's a temple standing or not, like the tithe of grains, which is a very interesting thing. Because now you're going to have a situation where you cannot bring the firstborn as an offering. Any firstborn offering born today, according to the Rambam, becomes holy, and you have to set it aside and keep track of it and make sure that it gets a blemish, and then you can give it to the Kohen. This is a big controversial point. Not everybody agrees with the Rambam, but that's how the Rambam rules it. However, says the Rambam, the laws of Bechor do not apply to a previously sanctified offering. If you have an animal that was put aside to be a sacrifice, it's already become holy, and it became pregnant and had a firstborn child, if the sacrifice hasn't yet been redeemed, in other words, it still retains its holiness as a sacrifice, Bechor doesn't apply to it. Bein kachim mizbeach, bein kachim bedek habayis, whatever level it was sanctified for, to be offered on the altar, to be given to the temple treasury. Once an animal becomes holy with an outside form of holiness, it cannot also have the holiness of Bechor if it has a firstborn son. Every Jew is obligated in this mitzvah for his animals. Kohanim, Levim, the Yisraelim, whether you're a Kohen, Levite, or a regular Israelite. Even though, if you think about it, who does the Bechor belong to? It belongs to the Kohen. Doesn't matter. If he gets a Bechor in his flock, he has to bring it to the temple, offer it, sprinkle its blood on the inside, as we explained. And he must eat the rest of the blood, treating it with the holy status of firstborn. Shanamar, because it says, going back to the original passage we quoted before, Kol ha-Bechor asher yivaled bivkarcha uvetzeincha, all firstborns that are born in your cattle and your sheep, all meaning, even if you're a Kohen, it doesn't make a difference. And Torah says, then you eat it in front of Hashem. But as we explained, when it came to Pidyon Ben, firstborn son laws, human son, or firstborn donkey laws, Kohanim Levim Pturim, Kameshabiarnu B'Hilchos Matnas Kahuna, Kohanim and Levites are exempt, as we explained in the laws of the Kohanic gifts, because there's derivations from the verses over there, separate thing. But this mitzvah, Bechor Behema Tahira, even Kohanim themselves are under its jurisdiction. Halacha Ches, HaBechor Nechal B'Toich Shnasim. The Bechor must be eaten within its first year of life. Bein Tamim, Bein Balmum, whether it's the unblemished version, so it's going to be offered as a sacrifice, and then eaten by the Kohanim, or it's a blemished offering, and then it's going to be eaten by the Kohanim directly. Has to be in the first year. Shneimar, as it says, Lifnei Hashem Alekecha. Here it is. Toichlenu shana v'shana. In front of God you shall eat it year by year. V'chiyeh v'imum b'sharecha toichlenu. And the verse continues, when there's a blemish, you eat it in your gates. But the Torah puts that next to toichlenu shana v'shana. So those words, year by year, apply to both scenarios. Whether it's an unblemished firstborn or a blemished one, it has to be eaten within the year. So now we have to know, when does the year count begin? So the Rambam says, Im tamu, if it's unblemished, you count from the 8th day, because only on the 8th day of the animal's life is it fit to be offered as a sacrifice, as we saw in the last book. And therefore you can only begin the count of its year from that day. If it was born with a blemish, you count from the day that it's born. So long as you know that it was a full-term pregnancy. Literally it means its months were concluded. You know that it was a full term. In which case it can be eaten right away when it's born. But if you don't know for sure that it was full-term pregnancy, you also wait to the 8th day. Then there's a certain level of viability that is attached to this baby, and you begin counting its year from then. Halacha tes, if it got a blemish during its first year of life, you don't get a discount, the count doesn't restart. You can only keep it for those 12 months, and that's it. Once the 12-month line hits, you must eat it by then. But if the blemish only comes at the end of the year, so the window of opportunity to have it eaten by a Kohen only opened up towards the end, you get a little extension, 30 days from when the mum came, even if that 30 days stretches you past the 12-month window. And that's because we want to give the Jew time to find the Kohen to give it to, otherwise we're going to force him to slaughter it right now, and then the meat might rot, and then the Kohen's going to lose out. So we give 30 days, find the Kohen, and get it all settled. Ketzad, what's an example of this? If the blemish came 15 days before the year was up, we give him another 15 days after the year is over. If the blemish only came after the first year was up, well, you shouldn't even have kept it till then, because you should have offered it as a sacrifice. But let's say that happened. You have again only 30 days, and it must be eaten by then. Any firstborns nowadays, you simply leave it till it gets a blemish and you eat it. You don't even think of the option of sacrificing. So long as the situation or the circumstance is not fitting for it to be examined by a sage. Now what does this mean? We're going to see in chapter 3 that in order for a firstborn to be declared with a blemish, if there's a doubt whether it's a blemish or not, you have to bring it to a special sage who was expert in examining, and he would declare whether it was a mum or not. So if no blemish had developed, which would require a sage's opinion, you can keep it even 2-3 years. Nowadays this is referring to. But once something happens that now forces you to show it to a sage, if it got a blemish during its first year of life, you keep it for those 12 months and that's it. But if the blemish only came after the year was up, you have exactly 30 days. Now, we keep on saying year, and we know when the year begins, but how long is a year? There's lunar years, there's solar years, there's Jewish leap years. What do we do with all these different situations? The year in relationship to a Bechor is a full lunar year. A Jewish year as we know it, Tishrei, Te'elul, Tzishkala, whatever, but it goes from whatever day the animal was born, obviously. 12 months from day to day. If it was a leap year, the leap year goes to you, you gain some time, and you get now 13 months. And here we have the famous case. Usually we say it about bar mitzvah. How could there be one boy born before the other boy, but we'll have his bar mitzvah after the second boy? Is in the case of a leap year, that Rambam now describes the same case when it comes to Bechor, where you can have an animal that was born earlier, but its deadline finishes later, or you have an animal that was born later, deadline finishes earlier. Mildu leishnei tlayim, if you had 2 sheep that were born to you, echad b'chamisha asar shel adar harishin. Ve'echad b'reish chodesh adar sheni, one was born on the 15th of the first adar, and the second one was born on the 1st of the second adar. So the next year when there's only one adar, zeh shnod b'reish chodesh adar sheni, kevan shehigia yem rishon ba'adar shana haba also leishana. The one that was born on the new month, the first day of a second adar, once the new month of adar comes the next year, his year is over, even though he was born later. But the one that was born halfway through the first adar, his year only ends at the halfway mark through adar of the next year. He was born in the additional month, the month of the leap month. So we count it towards him, and he gets that extra time. A person transgresses and keeps the Bechor past its year, even though he has transgressed the prohibition. If it was still unblemished, it doesn't become disqualified, you should still offer it. If it had a blemish, you can slaughter it anywhere. As it says, going back to the juxtaposition verse, here it is, the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, and the firstborns of your cattle and your sheep. We compare the firstborn to the tithe. The same way tithes. You should give it that year, but if you didn't, it doesn't disqualify one year to the other. So too the firstborn doesn't become disqualified if it passes from one year to the next. A general law. You don't give the Bechor to the Kohen right when it's born. That's not respect. It's not honor to the Kohen. Newborn baby, there's too much care that's involved in it. The owners have to care for it till it grows up a little bit, and then you give it to the Kohen. How long is that little bit? Until how long do Jews have to take care of the Bechor? If it's what's called an ovine, the thinner animals, sheep and goats, 30 days. Uvegasa, if it's a bovine, the bigger animals, 50 days. Even if the Kohen tells you an offer, you give it to me now, I'll take care of it. You cannot give it to him. That's like a Kohen who helps to get his gifts of grain, which is not allowed. We already explained in the laws of the Truma, any Kohen who helps along in the threshing house, or in the butchery, or amongst the shepherds, we cannot give them their gifts as pay. If the Kohen takes on the job of caring for the animal early, it would seem like you're choosing to give it to him because of this caring that he's doing for you. That's like paying him for his work. You cannot do that. You must hold it by you and keep it for the expected time frame. If the firstborn had a blemish anyways. And the Kohen tells you, listen, anyway, it has a blemish. Tanayuli, give it to me. I want to eat it right now. Or it was unblemished. And the Kohen says, give it to me now, and I'm going to offer it now. He's not saying I'm going to take care of it. He's saying, I want to just be done with it now. Let's go. Let's offer it. You can give it to him. And it seems to me, says the Rambam, that the Bechor is at your prerogative. You can give it to whatever Kohen you want. If a Kohen consumes even an olive-sized portion of an unblemished firstborn outside of Jerusalem, he gets biblical lashes. As it says in the verse, a different verse, you may not eat just anywhere in your gates. The tithes of your grain, wine, and oil, and the firstborns of your cattle and sheep. You cannot eat them. This is referring to the unblemished version of it. You cannot eat them anywhere in your gates. Has to be in Jerusalem. Or if a non-Kohen ate an olive-sized portion from a Bechor, whether before or after his blood was sprinkled, you get lashes. Because we learn from tradition, this same verse is also a warning to a non-Kohen who eats a Bechor, whether before or after its blood was sprinkled. The Bechor, as we said in the beginning of the chapter, is not redeemed. Unlike human firstborns, donkey firstborns, you don't redeem it. As it says, and we had the verse before, we'll go back to it again. The firstborn of an ox or a sheep or a goat, you don't redeem. You cannot sell it when it's still unblemished. Since it's standing to be offered as a sacrifice, the Kohen has no right to sell it. Nowadays there's no temple anyways. Since in the end it's going to be eaten, once it gets a blemish, you can sell it even in its earlier state while it's still unblemished, whether to a Kohen or to a regular Jew. Yudches, Becher Balmum, a firstborn that has a blemish, Yesh la kohen lemachre b'chol zman. The kohen can sell it at any time. Bein lifnei abayis, bein shlei b'fnei abayis, whether the temple standing or not temple standing. Bein chai, bein shocho, whether it's alive or slaughtered. It's his animal. He can do whatever he wants with it. But when you do sell the meat of a bechor that has a blemish, you should sell it privately in a home, not in the marketplace. As we said in the laws of the forbidden entities to be offered on the altar in the last book of the Rambam. But the meat of an unblemished bechor can never be sold because it's holy meat. Any kohanim who are in the group and are going to be consuming the meat of the bechor, mutarin lishkal mana keneged mana, they can weigh portions to divide it equally, even though it looks like a transaction. It's not called a transaction for these laws. Yutes hamafshit bechor balmum. When you skin a bechor with a blemish, you can skin it in whatever way you want. Margil, if you want to do the procedure called margil, where you rip it off from the foot and you get the whole skinning off in one. An interesting process, you can do that. Any other disqualified sacrifices, if you wanted to skin it from the feet, by way of the feet, you're allowed to do that, even though, again, it does seem like you're a little bit misusing or abusing the holy offering, because you're just going to kind of take the skin off in one fell swoop to get a nice shape and to use it for something else. But again, it's disqualified. It's not fully holy in its ideal state, and therefore you can do whatever type of skinning that you want.